9:47 a.m. The exact time stamped in my memory. Pack your things. Lila Pierce, the new COO, didn't just say it. She barked it across the floor loud enough for 3 departments to hear. Her voice hit harder than any fire alarm. The entire office went still. Even the printer in the corner chose that moment to spit out a single blank page before jamming. Someone coughed. Then silence. I stood at my desk, hands flat on the surface. Lila positioned herself like she was addressing a courtroom. Glossy suit, arms crossed, chin lifted. She had arrived 3 months ago with big talk about efficiency and accountability. Today, her version of accountability was me. You delayed compliance reporting, she said, flipping open a folder. You failed to copy me on critical correspondence. You ignored protocol. She rattled off minor errors as if they were crimes. None of it mattered. I could have stayed until midnight every day this year, and she still would have wanted a head on display. What she wanted was control. Colleagues in nearby cubicles stared hard at their screens, typing nonsense just to look occupied. I caught one of them watching me in the reflection of a monitor, then quickly turning away. Nobody wanted to be associated with me now. Lila tossed the folder onto my desk. Papers slid across the surface. She didn't bend down to collect them. That was supposed to be my job, one last gesture of submission. I didn't move. Marla from HR appeared at my side, holding a cardboard box. She looked at me like she was carrying a contagious file. For your belongings, she said. Her eyes never lifted above the floor. I placed a photo, a coffee mug, and a plant into the box. Years of work, millions saved for this company, reduced to 3 objects and a thin layer of dust. Lila's tone sharpened. Security will escort you down. She turned her back before the sentence was finished, heels striking the tiles as she walked back to her corner office. That was the signal. Show's over. The audience of employees dropped their eyes back to their monitors. Not one person said a word. I stayed still a moment longer. My right hand brushed over the keyboard. A small input, something invisible. Not sabotage. Not destruction. Just a confirmation. A reminder in the system that I existed, and that I had not completed the mandatory transition procedure. A box unchecked that could not legally be ignored. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever did. Finally, I lifted the box and walked. The floor felt longer than usual. Every cubicle a silent witness. I passed the break room where stale coffee sat on the warmer. I passed the copier that jammed at least twice a day. All the details of a place that had consumed decades of my time. No one stopped me. No one thanked me. The air was heavy with the kind of silence that follows an accident. People watching but pretending they didn't. At the glass exit doors, I turned. For the first time that morning, every pair of eyes flicked up. They wanted to see the ending. They wanted tears, anger, collapse. Something to mark the final scene. Instead, I gave them 2 words. Calm, steady, without raising my voice. Good luck. Then I left. The box under my arm felt light. Too light for the weight it represented. But I didn't care about the plant or the mug. I cared about the clause Lila and her friends had just triggered by forcing me out without a transition. That detail would cost them more than they could imagine. At 9:47 a.m. They thought they had erased me. In reality, they had started a countdown. The elevator doors closed behind me, and with them the performance ended. No audience now. Just me, a box, and the stale smell of carpet cleaner. The lobby guard gave me a quick nod, the kind that wasn't sympathy, just routine. He'd seen people escorted out before. He didn't ask questions. He buzzed me out and that was it. Years inside this building, gone in under 10 minutes. Outside, the morning was bright, too bright. My car sat in the far corner of the lot, where I'd parked out of habit. I set the box on the passenger seat. The plant tilted sideways, spilling dirt onto the upholstery. I didn't fix it. I sat there with the engine off, hands on the wheel, breathing. I replayed every second of the last half hour. The folder thrown on my desk. The silence from my so-called colleagues. Lila's voice, sharp as glass. And then my own keystroke. That part stayed with me. Small, quick, nothing visible. But I knew exactly what it meant. I drove home without turning on the radio. My kitchen table became the new command center. I dumped the box out like evidence bags in an investigation. The mug rolled, the photo frame clattered, the plant spilled more dirt. Useless objects, all of them. The real assets weren't in cardboard. I pulled my old leather binder from the cabinet. Thick, worn, pages filled with notes from years of building and patching systems no one else bothered to understand. Not flashy work, not the kind you brag about at company parties, But it kept the numbers flowing, the reports clean, the investors calm. And tucked between the pages was the one sheet that mattered. My employment agreement. Clause 14. 3 buried near the end where nobody ever read. No critical system may be altered, certified, or transferred without a supervised transition session with the system owner or a designated successor. Failure to obtain such certification shall constitute breach of compliance protocol. Translation. You can fire me, but you cannot legally use what I built without me walking you through it. They had skipped that step. Publicly. On record. I poured a glass of water and read it twice more, underlining the dates. Their decision had created a gap. A very expensive gap. If they filed reports without my transition, auditors would see it. If they delayed the reports, banks would ask why. Either way, the clock was ticking. 9:47 a.m. Wasn't just humiliation. It was the start of a countdown to a crisis. By noon, the box was back in the closet and the binder sat open on the table. I drew a quick map of the system in pen. Arrows for workflows, circles for checkpoints. My handwriting wasn't pretty, but the logic was clear. Every revenue stream, every reconciliation, every certification, all roads went through me. They thought they'd erased me. Instead, they'd made me the missing link. I checked my email. My company account was already locked. Expected. But external records weren't. Vendor logs, public filings, archived statements, they were all available to anyone who knew where to look. I downloaded what I needed, folder after folder, until the drive on my laptop was heavy with data. The numbers told a story. Clean on the surface. Too clean. I knew where to press next. At 2 p.m. The phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring out. A minute later, Marla from HR left a voicemail. Her tone was flat, almost rushed. Evelyn, please return your keycard at your earliest convenience. Mail it or drop it at reception. I laughed. The keycard was useless now, but her urgency wasn't about the plastic. It was about procedure. They wanted to check every box, cover every angle. Except the one that mattered. I slid the card into the binder pocket, next to clause 14. 3. Let them wait. That night I spread everything across the table. Binder, logs, contract. I ordered takeout and ate with one hand while marking dates with the other. Deadlines stacked like dominoes. End of quarter, end of month, regulatory submissions. All hanging on a session that would never happen unless I allowed it. I didn't need to threaten. I didn't need to touch a single system again. All I had to do was sit here, wait, and let their own decisions collapse under their weight. By midnight, I closed the binder and shut off the lights. Tomorrow I'd start the real work, finding exactly how much money was tied to this clause and how far I could stretch it. 9:47 a.m. had been their performance. But the rest of the show? That belonged to me. The next morning I was awake before the alarm. No coffee, no breakfast, no distractions. The binder was already open on the kitchen table where I had left it. I went straight to the section marked reporting windows. Dates highlighted. Notes in my handwriting crammed into the margins. Every line connected to something larger. Banking covenants, audit schedules, investor calls. All of it required certified continuity. And that certification had to come from me. Now they didn't have it. I started working through the numbers. Public filings, vendor invoices, quarterly summaries. The irregularity jumped out faster than I expected. A reconciliation vendor. Small, almost invisible, yet responsible for processing transactions north of $100 million. Their invoices carried the same description again and again. Temporary services. The amounts were too clean, too round, like someone had smoothed the edges on purpose. The journals looked fine on paper, but the timestamps told a different story. Payments recorded before approvals. Entries appearing before authorizations. It was a pattern designed for anyone skimming, not for anyone actually reading. Numbers don't lie. But people do. By the afternoon I had a case forming. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even personal. It was a sequence of facts, each pointing to the same conclusion. They had operated without proper certification. And since the system they were running was mine, the gap wasn't just visible, it was undeniable. That clause in my contract made me more than an ex-employee with a grievance. It made me relevant, the one person who could confirm or deny compliance. They thought they had erased me. Legally, I was still carved into the foundation. At 3 o'clock I called Jonah Beck, the IT lead. Not from my phone. I used an old prepaid I kept for vendor work. He answered with a cautious tone, like he already knew trouble was at his door. Evelyn? You shouldn't be calling. You're right, I said. But you know what happens when the system isn't transitioned. There was silence on his end, then a sigh. They told me not to talk to you. Of course they did. Did they also tell you why last week's patch skipped dual control? More silence. I heard faint typing through the line. Then he said quietly, that wasn't me. Gordon pushed it through himself. I refused to sign. I almost smiled. Good. Keep that refusal. You'll need it. Before he could ask what I meant, I cut the line. That evening the kitchen table looked less like a dining surface and more like a crime scene board. Binder open, contract visible, logs stacked in piles. Jonah's words echoed in my head. Gordon had pushed a patch without the required approval. That wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. I leaned back and let the picture settle. Lila wanted control, Gordon wanted shortcuts, and Victor Kane wanted to stay clean. None of them noticed that by cutting me out, they turned me into the missing link. I didn't have to act immediately. The longer I waited, the more pressure would build on their side. Deadlines were moving closer every hour. Reports would have to be filed. Banks would demand explanations. Investors would expect answers. I closed the binder at midnight. No grand speech, no dramatic gesture. Just a single thought. Tomorrow would be about timing. At 9:47 a.m. They thought they had erased me. What they had really done was open a gap in their own system. And I was the only one who could close it. The day started with a copy of my own contract. I had pulled it from the binder so many times the pages had gone soft at the edges. I turned to the back where most people never bother to read. Clause 14. 3. The language was simple. No critical system could be altered or certified without a supervised transition session with the owner. No session, no compliance. It wasn't negotiable. They had skipped it. And they had done it in public. I read it again with fresh eyes. The clause wasn't just about process. It was about liability. If they filed numbers without me signing off, every executive signature underneath those reports was vulnerable. Theo, the CFO, even the board if they ignored it. I underlined the date of my termination. Yesterday, 9:47 a.m. That was the moment the breach started. From then on, every transaction they processed was under a shadow. By mid-morning, I pulled financial records from the vendor portal again. Same small company, same round dollar invoices. Nothing illegal on the surface, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Transactions cleared faster than approvals, payments logged before signatures. The kind of thing that could pass if nobody looked too closely. But someone was going to look closely. That was the point. At lunch I went out for the first time since leaving the office. The cafe down the street was quiet, half full of people pretending to work on laptops. I took a corner seat and opened my binder. I imagined the next week at headquarters. Lila pacing her office, Victor smiling for the cameras, Gordon signing papers he didn't read. None of them realizing that the system they were relying on had no legal certification. It wasn't sabotage. I hadn't touched a single number. I didn't need to. The structure itself would expose them. By afternoon I drafted a letter. Not a threat, not an outburst. Just a polite reminder. I cited the exact clause, the termination date, and the fact that no transition session had been conducted. I offered availability at the contract rate for a formal session. The rate was high, but it had always been high. I printed it, signed it, and set it aside. It wasn't time to send it yet. The longer the silence stretched, the more valuable that letter would become. At 6 p.m., I checked my voicemail. 2 messages from Marla in HR. Her tone had shifted from routine to strained. Evelyn, please return your keycard as soon as possible. It's important. She didn't mention the clause. Maybe she hadn't read far enough into the contract. Or maybe she had, and that was why her voice shook. I slipped the card into the back of the binder and left it there. That night I read through the clause again. Simple words, black ink, nothing dramatic. But in those lines was the leverage they couldn't escape. They thought the problem ended when I walked out with a cardboard box. In reality, the problem had just begun. The gap was theirs. The control was mine. The next morning I scanned vendor records again. One entry caught my eye. A temporary reconciliation service, billed at $500,000. The description was vague, the dates tighter than usual. Money moved in before the service was even marked complete. I leaned back. This wasn't sloppy accounting. This was deliberate. Clean numbers that only looked right at a glance. By 10 o'clock I had a timeline. The vendor first appeared 6 months ago, right after Lila's arrival. Invoices escalated every quarter. Gordon Hale, the CFO, signed every one of them. His initials were neat on each line, but the sequence didn't fit. Approvals logged after payments. That was the weakness. The reports could survive errors, but they couldn't survive a reverse chain of approvals. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence. Find the pressure point. At noon I called Jonah again. This time he answered on the first ring. His voice was hushed, like he was speaking from a stairwell. They're scrambling, he said. Lila ordered another patch. She wants the logs adjusted before auditors see them. And you? I asked. I refused again. I'm not going down for this. His fear was real. Fear was useful. Then keep refusing, I told him. And keep a copy of everything you touch. Don't edit. Don't delete. Just save. He didn't ask why. He knew enough. By evening my kitchen table was covered again. Logs, invoices, copies of the clause. A pattern was forming, sharp and undeniable. They thought firing me had cleared the way. Instead, they'd removed the only person who could certify their numbers. The whole operation rested on a missing link. And I was that link. I asked Jonah to meet in person. Neutral ground, nothing obvious. We picked a cafe near the river, the kind where no one cared if you stayed too long with a single drink. He showed up late, looking like he hadn't slept. Hoodie instead of his usual button-down, dark circles under his eyes. He ordered coffee, didn't touch it. You shouldn't have called me, he said. You came, I replied. He rubbed his hands together. Lila's in overdrive. Gordon signs anything she puts in front of him. Victor just wants clean numbers for the investor call. Nobody's asking questions. They will, I said. Jonah glanced around, lowered his voice. She told me to bypass dual control on a reconciliation patch. That's fraud if anyone checks. Did you keep the log? He nodded. And a screenshot. Good. That was all I needed to hear. We sat in silence a moment. People around us typed, scrolled, pretended to work remotely. No one cared who we were. You're playing with fire, Jonah muttered. They already lit the match, I said. I'm just holding the smoke. He almost smiled but shook his head. If this collapses, they'll drag me down too. Not if your refusals are on record, I told him. Keep them safe. They'll matter soon. He tapped the table once, then stood. I shouldn't be seen with you. Then don't, I said and watched him leave. I stayed a while longer, staring at the untouched coffee in front of me. Jonah had confirmed what I already suspected. The patch wasn't an accident. It was a shortcut. And shortcuts always leave a trail. Deadlines don't bend. They snap. The company had 4 days before the quarter closed. 4 days to certify numbers that couldn't legally be certified without me. If they filed anyway, it would leave fingerprints. If they delayed, banks would start asking why. Either option worked in my favor. I mapped the countdown on my kitchen wall with sticky notes. Dates, times, submission portals. I marked 11:59 p.m. Friday in red. That was the filing cutoff. Every hour leading to it was pressure on their side, leverage on mine. Lila thought firing me had ended a problem. What she had done was start a timer. And the louder the seconds ticked, the closer her desk would get to shaking. 3 p.m. I checked the news. Victor Kane was quoted in a press release, smiling for the cameras, talking about record performance and flawless execution. I almost laughed. He was promoting stability while standing on a hollow floor. Behind that smile, he had no certified transition. No compliance system. Nothing but signatures stacked on quicksand. That night, I pulled out my contract again and read Clause 14. 3 one more time. The words were dry legal, designed to put anyone to sleep. But they were also a loaded weapon. Every tick of the clock pulled the trigger closer. All I had to do was wait. The next morning I printed the letter. Plain paper, no emotion. Just dates, clause citations, and the fact that no transition session had taken place. At the bottom, my signature. Nothing else. I sealed it in an envelope and walked it to the post office. Registered mail, return receipt. That way, when it landed on HR's desk, there'd be proof it arrived. By afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it ring. Minutes later, a voicemail. Marla from HR. Evelyn, we received your correspondence. I've passed it along to leadership. We'll be in touch. Her voice was tight, rushed. Not the tone of someone dismissing a crank letter. The tone of someone who just realized a fire was already burning under her chair. I didn't call back. I didn't need to. The silence would work harder than I could. Every hour they hesitated to respond, the breach grew larger. By evening I checked the tracking number again. Delivered. Signed for. A permanent record already logged. I poured a glass of water and sat with the binder on my lap. The letter wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. And reminders have sharp edges. The paper was simple. The cut it caused would not be. By Monday, the company brought in outside muscle. Tom Reed. Consultant. Reputation built on cleaning up corporate disasters. His fee alone could pay for half a department's salaries, but Victor loved the optics. A fixer parachuting in to save the quarter. Tom didn't waste time with small talk. He sat with a stack of reports in front of him, flipping pages like he was scanning for landmines. Within an hour he spotted the gap. No certified transition? His tone was flat but his eyebrow twitched. Marla stammered something about HR protocols. Gordon claimed it was an oversight. Lila interrupted with jargon about streamlined compliance. Tom just let them dig the hole deeper. Then he leaned back and said, "You filed this without a transition owner?" The room went quiet. Victor tried a smile. "The system is stable. Our numbers are accurate." Tom tapped the clause I'd cited in my letter. Stable doesn't matter. Certified does. And right now you don't have it. That same evening I heard from Jonah. He texted one line. "Consultant asked about you. They're sweating." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The fact that Tom had already connected the dots told me everything. My letter hadn't just been received. It had landed exactly where I wanted it. In the hands of someone who knew the difference between clean numbers and compliant numbers. And Tom Reed wasn't the kind of man to ignore leverage. Tuesday morning, I woke to an email ping on my personal account. Anonymous sender. Subject line: check filings. Inside was a link to the public database. I opened it. The company had submitted preliminary quarter numbers late last night. Smooth figures, record highs, the kind Victor would brag about on camera. But the metadata told a different story. Submission timestamp: 11:32 p.m. No certified transition logged. No supporting documentation attached. They had filed blind. I pulled the PDFs and spread them across my table. The pattern was clear. The same vendor invoices stacked in clean rows, the same round numbers, the same missing approvals. To anyone glancing it looked fine. To anyone reading it looked staged. I drafted a short memo, 3 pages. Plain language, no accusations. Just dates, signatures, and one undeniable mismatch between approval logs and payment records. Attached 2 exhibits, nothing more. At the top I wrote, "Submitted through whistleblower hotline per protocol." Then I hit send. By evening Jonah messaged again. Audit team landed. Priya Shah leading. She asked for raw logs. Lila is furious. Good. Priya was known for tearing through excuses. If she had her hands on the raw data, it was only a matter of time before she saw what I saw. The numbers were clean only at first glance. Under real light they glared. Numbers don't blink. People do. Wednesday morning my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go but curiosity won. "This is Priya Shah, external auditor. We need to talk." Her tone was clipped professional. No pleasantries. She named a neutral office building downtown and told me to be there at 3. No request. An instruction. The room was plain. White walls, a table, 2 chairs. Priya walked in with a laptop under her arm. No entourage, no theatrics. She set it down, opened a folder and looked me straight in the eye. "You designed the certification protocol?" "Yes." "And you were terminated without a transition session?" "Yes." She tapped the folder. Logs show Gordon Hale authorizing a patch last week. His approval appears after execution. That is irregular. "It's fraudulent," I said. She didn't flinch. "Do you have evidence beyond what we pulled?" I slid a flash drive across the table. Copies of logs, dates highlighted, Jonah's refusals intact. She plugged it in, scrolled for 2 minutes, then closed the laptop. "That's enough," she said. "We'll test this tomorrow unannounced." Walking out, I didn't feel triumphant. Just steady. The game had shifted. They thought they controlled the narrative. Tomorrow control would vanish. Priya didn't wait. Thursday morning, she arrived unannounced at headquarters with 2 junior auditors in tow. No warnings, no calendar invites. She walked straight past reception, badge clipped to her blazer, and headed for the 12th floor. Jonah texted me as soon as she arrived. They're losing it. Lila's screaming. Gordon's sweating through his shirt. I could picture it without even being there. Glass walls, blinds drawn halfway. Executives circling the table with laptops open and excuses ready. Priya didn't care about excuses. She wanted logs. She wanted raw data. She wanted the sequence from the last 6 months printed and time-stamped. Jonah later told me she started quiet, asking simple questions. Then she began pressing harder. Why do approvals appear after execution? Why are timestamps altered? Who authorized bypassing dual control? Each question was a knife. Lila tried to bluff. She threw around words like streamlined workflows and modernized compliance. Priya cut through it in 2 sentences. There is no streamlined version of dual control. There is compliant and non-compliant. Victor tried charm. He leaned back in his chair, smiled, and told her the company was in the middle of a transformative period. Priya's reply was flat. Transformations don't alter timestamps retroactively. Then it was Gordon's turn. He folded fast. Denied, hedged, then admitted. I signed what was put in front of me. I trusted the process. His hand shook as he spoke. Priya asked if he personally verified the sequence before signing. He didn't answer. By noon, Jonah slipped into the stairwell to message me again. She asked directly about the transition clause. Lila froze. They never scheduled it. Everyone knows now. That was the crack I had been waiting for. Once Priya confirmed the breach, the board couldn't ignore it. A consultant might patch numbers, but an auditor's note would stay forever. At 3 o'clock, Tom Reed joined the meeting. He wasn't smiling this time. He carried a folder thicker than my binder. He dropped it on the table and said one line. Your filings are indefensible without certification. The room fell silent. Victor finally lost his calm. He snapped at Tom, accusing him of exaggeration, of blowing minor process errors out of proportion. Tom didn't flinch. He slid my letter across the table, the one I had mailed days ago, and tapped my signature at the bottom. Your system owner told you. You ignored it. That's not a mistake. That's negligence. From there the tone shifted. No more charm, no more bluffs. It became damage control. Marla whispered about legal exposure. Gordon muttered about timing issues. Lila tried to blame staff turnover. Priya cut them all off. The issue isn't staffing. The issue is compliance. You fired the system owner and filed numbers without transition. Every signature here is at risk. And if this goes to regulators, every one of you is liable. Jonah said the silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. That night, I sat at my table with the binder closed in front of me. I didn't need to open it. I knew every line by heart now. The countdown I had marked on my wall wasn't just ticking anymore. It was echoing through their boardroom. They thought firing me had been the final act. Today they realized it was the opening scene. Friday morning, the board's legal counsel issued a formal request. A supervised transition session with me. Jonah forwarded me the internal memo. The language was stiff, but the meaning was clear. Without my certification, their filings couldn't stand. I read it twice, then set the phone down. They had reached the point I'd been waiting for. At headquarters, panic turned into logistics. Who would contact me? How fast I could be brought in? Whether I would even agree. Lila wanted to stonewall. Victor wanted to negotiate. Gordon wanted to disappear. Tom Reed told them to stop wasting time. She holds the key. You don't. Call her. By noon, Marla finally reached me. Her voice was thin. Evelyn, the company requests your assistance with the transition session. We're prepared to compensate you at your standard rate. I let her finish. Then I said, that won't be enough. Silence stretched on her end. This isn't optional, I added. Clause 14. 3 gives me the authority. You skipped it. Now you'll pay the penalty rates written in the contract. Her breath caught. I'll relay that to leadership. Do that, I said and hung up. I poured a glass of water and sat back. For the first time all week, I wasn't the one under pressure. They were. And they finally knew it. The company didn't wait long to respond. By evening, Marla called again. Her tone was brittle like glass about to crack. Evelyn, Leadership accepts your position. Please provide your availability. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch until she shifted in her chair on the other end. Then I said, my availability isn't the issue. The contract rate is. She hesitated. We agreed. You agreed to the standard rate, I cut in. But the clause specifies penalty multipliers if the transition is skipped. You skipped it. That makes it 7 times the base. The line went dead quiet. Finally she whispered, that's a significant amount. Yes, I said. Significant. But cheaper than a failed quarter. Behind the scenes I imagined the fallout. Gordon running numbers he didn't understand. Lila pacing in circles, furious at being outmaneuvered. Victor pretending to stay calm while calculating investor reactions. Tom Reed, though, he would get it. He'd see the price as the cost of negligence. And Priya would confirm it in her audit report. No wiggle room, no escape. I ended the call on my terms. Short, final, without negotiation. They thought firing me had been cheap. Now they were learning the real price. The session was scheduled for Monday. They called it a certification meeting. I called it proof that the balance of power had shifted. When I arrived, the 12th floor looked different. Security posted at the elevators. Assistants whispering in corners. The usual buzz of keyboards replaced by silence thick enough to hear a pin drop. They escorted me into a glass-walled conference room. Everyone was there. Victor at the head of the table, smiling like a man trying too hard. Lila jaw tight, eyes sharp with anger. Gordon pale and sweating. Marla clutching her folder like a shield. And Tom Reed, arms folded, watching. Priya Shah sat with her laptop open, ready to record. I set my binder on the table and sat. No pleasantries. Shall we begin? I asked. The process was simple. I walked them through the revenue workflows step by step. System triggers, reconciliation cycles, dual control checkpoints. Nothing dramatic, nothing hidden. Just the mechanics of what kept their billions flowing. For 2 hours I spoke and they listened. Lila tried to interrupt once, to dismiss part of my explanation as outdated. Priya stopped her cold. This is the certified design. Outdated or not, it's binding until replaced legally. Victor shifted uncomfortably. Gordon stared at his notes, not daring to look up. Every keystroke I demonstrated, every timestamp I explained dug the hole deeper. Because the moment the system ran live without me, those same checkpoints had been violated. And the logs showed it. Halfway through, Priya asked for a live test. Jonah was called in. He logged into the system and ran the reconciliation exactly as I instructed. The screen filled with entries. Then it froze. A vendor account failed the sequence. The reconciliation flagged mismatched approvals tied to the temporary services vendor. Payment cleared 2 days before authorization. The system marked it in red. Priya leaned closer to the screen. Run it again. Jonah did. Same result. Red warning. The room went dead silent. Priya turned to Gordon. Did you authorize this? His mouth opened then closed. His face drained of color. Finally he muttered. I signed what was put in front of me. Without review. He didn't answer. Priya closed her laptop with a snap. This breach is material. It will be noted in my report. Victor finally broke. Let's not exaggerate. These are technicalities. Tom Reed's voice cut through the room. No. This is negligence. And it's documented. I finished the session, signed the certification, and slid the paper across the table. You have your transition now. Compliant. Documented. Use it carefully. Lila's hands were clenched so tight her knuckles were white. Victor looked like he wanted to smile but couldn't. Gordon seemed ready to collapse. Priya gathered her notes. We'll follow up with the board. Expect questions. She stood and walked out. Tom followed, expression unreadable. I packed my binder slowly, giving the room one last look. The same glass walls that had been their stage for humiliating me were now their cage. Everyone outside could see them. And everyone inside knew what had just happened. The system was certified. But the damage was permanent. Back in the elevator, I watched the numbers descend. No satisfaction, no drama. Just the steady realization that the game had tilted. They had brought me in to fix their problem. Instead, I had exposed it in front of their own witnesses. And now, it was only a matter of time before the board moved. By Tuesday, the fallout was in motion. Priya's preliminary notes had gone straight to the board. They weren't just about missing certifications. They highlighted something bigger. Payments routed through the reconciliation vendor that didn't match legitimate workflows. The word she used was careful but heavy. Irregular. Gordon panicked first. He spent the morning locked in his office, shredding papers and barking at his assistant. Jonah told me he saw him sweating through 2 shirts before noon. Lila tried to control the narrative. She called emergency meetings, blamed system errors, accused Jonah of incompetence. But Priya had the logs. And the logs didn't bend. Victor tried charm again, this time with Tom Reed. Promised bonuses, hinted at future contracts. Tom shut him down with one sentence. Stop talking before you incriminate yourself. That evening, Jonah slipped me another update. The auditors had confirmed the vendor account wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. It traced back to a shell company tied to Gordon's college roommate. Millions funneled through temporary services. Not my problem to prosecute, but my problem to surface. The board wouldn't ignore this. The breach wasn't just about me anymore. It was about fraud. The board called an emergency meeting Wednesday night. Not in the usual glass conference room, but in the top-floor executive suite behind closed doors. Curtains drawn. Phones collected at the door. Jonah fed me details afterward. He wasn't in the room, but his friend in IT was tasked with setting up the projector. He caught enough whispers to paint the picture. At the head of the table sat the chairwoman, Eleanor Briggs. Cold reputation, sharper than any CEO who had ever passed through the company. She spoke first, and it wasn't small talk. We have a compliance breach tied to terminated staff. We have unauthorized patches. We have irregular vendor activity. And we have filings already submitted. This is not a discussion about optics. This is liability. Her words cut the room in half. Gordon cracked almost immediately. He admitted to signing off on invoices without reviewing the sequence. He blamed volume pressure, trust in the process. His voice shook. When Eleanor asked if he understood the personal liability he had just confessed to, he went pale. Lila fought harder. She tried to spin the firing as performance-based, claimed the clause was outdated language irrelevant to modern operations. Eleanor shut her down in a single line. Contracts don't expire because you find them inconvenient. Victor was the last to fold. He leaned on charm the same way he always did. Smiled, joked, promised quick resolution. Eleanor didn't smile back. You filed without certification, she said. You presented numbers as compliant when they were not. That is not quick resolution. That is misconduct. The room went still. Priya presented her findings. Slide after slide, timestamp after timestamp. Red warnings glowing against the wall. Every irregular entry tied to the reconciliation vendor. Every skipped approval logged and preserved. Then came Tom Reed. His voice was calm but heavy. The breach is structural. You cannot paper this over. You cannot blame staff turnover. This is negligence at the executive level. And if regulators see it, the consequences will not be limited to the company. Gordon buried his face in his hands. Lila's jaw tightened so hard her teeth must have hurt. Victor leaned back, eyes narrowing, calculating his exit. Eleanor closed the binder in front of her. Effective immediately, Gordon Hale and Lila Pierce are suspended pending investigation. Victor, your position will be reviewed after external counsel completes their assessment. Until then, you will not speak to investors or the press. Nobody argued. By midnight, the board had drafted the notice. Suspensions delivered. Internal statement prepared. Legal counsel engaged. The machine was moving, and this time not in their favor. I didn't need to be in that room to feel it. The shift was obvious. The same executives who had smirked while I carried out a cardboard box were now cornered, stripped of power, and bleeding credibility. And all of it traced back to 9:47 a.m. Monday morning. The minute they thought they had erased me. Now they knew the truth. I wasn't erased. I was the key witness. Thursday morning, the company delayed its investor call. Official line. Finalizing numbers. Reality panic. Jonah told me the 12th floor looked like a bunker. Lights on all night, staff drafted from every department. Priya demanded clean reconciliations. Tom Reed forced them to rerun entire workflows with me listed as certifying owner. The clock was merciless. Filing cutoff. 11:59 p.m. Friday. Miss it and the banks would freeze credit lines. File dirty and the auditors would flag fraud. 6 p.m. Marla called me again. Her voice had lost its edge. Evelyn, we've processed the transition session. Priya requires your signed certification on the final reconciliation. Will you provide it? I'll provide what the contract allows, I said. Nothing more, nothing less. She didn't argue. She just asked where to send the documents. By midnight, I reviewed the package at my kitchen table. The numbers finally aligned. Clean this time, not cosmetic. I signed the certification, scanned it, and sent it back. The quarter would file late but accurate. Investors would grumble. Markets would dip. But the company would survive. And everyone in the building knew why. Friday morning, Victor called me directly. No intermediaries this time. His voice was smooth, but the cracks showed. Evelyn, the board wants to resolve this quickly. Name your terms. I let the silence stretch. He hated silence. Finally, I said, full severance at original agreement, plus penalty interest for breach, plus a compliance bonus for transition under duress. That's substantial, he said carefully. It's cheaper than an investigation, I replied. By noon, their lawyers sent over the draft. Money wasn't the only clause I wanted. I added 3 more lines. Written exoneration, permanent advisory retainer, and a sentence in Victor's internal memo acknowledging the skip transition. He balked at the last one. That's unnecessary. It's non-negotiable. He sighed. Papers shuffled on his end. Fine. At 4 p.m., the documents arrived by courier. I signed them in blue ink, scanned the copies, and slid the originals into my binder. For the first time all week, I closed the binder and felt its weight shift from burden to proof. They thought they had erased me. Instead, I had turned their mistake into leverage. And now they had paid for it. The contract was signed, the money wired, the memos circulated. My name was no longer whispered with pity in the cubicles. It was written into official records, stamped, and filed as part of the company's survival. Friday evening, I returned to the building one last time. The lobby guard gave me a respectful nod this time, not just a routine one. My badge still worked, though I knew it would be deactivated by midnight. I took the elevator to the server floor. The air was cool, the hum constant, the same rhythm I had worked beside for years. I walked past the racks, past the cables, past the machines that had consumed half my life. For once, I wasn't here to fix anything. I was here to close the book. I left my badge on the table in the empty conference room. No speech. No ceremony. Just plastic sliding against wood. On the way out, I thought about 9:47 a.m. The shouting. The silence of my colleagues. The box in my arms. The humiliation they thought would erase me. And I thought about how wrong they were. What this week proved wasn't just that I had leverage. It proved that knowledge left in the shadows is more powerful than the titles written on the glass doors. They had ignored me for years, treated my work as background noise, invisible, automatic. And when they pushed me out, they discovered what happens when the invisible refuses to disappear. The smartest move I ever made wasn't a keystroke or a memo. It was patience. Letting them trap themselves. Letting their own arrogance expose the truth. All I did was stand still long enough for their mistakes to find daylight. So here's my question to you. Do you think the real power in a company belongs to the people with titles on the glass doors? Or to the people who quietly know how everything actually works? Write your answer in the comments. I'm curious which side you believe holds the real control. Every story lives as long as it is remembered. A like is your mark on this story, and a subscription is your ticket to the next one.